The people are the associates, or the contracting individuals considered as a collective. And the citizens are these associates or contracting individuals considered as individuals, but only insofar as they participate in sovereign authority. So citizens are a very normatively laden term. Like there's a lot of I want to say values or I don't know, moral content to the term citizen, because the citizen is someone who's engaged in this process of making rules that bind themselves and others. And so one who lacks that right, or one who is, legally a citizen but doesn't vote, and doesn't, partake in any public discussions, and doesn't, debate people on Facebook to try to determine what the right laws are, that person is not a citizen on Rousseau's term. They're just someone who happens to enjoy legal citizenship, but they're not really a citizen. And subjects are the associates insofar as they're subjected to the laws that bind the state. So how are we going to approach social contract? We talked about this last time, or the general will. We talked about this last time. We engaged in close reading, in which we collected evidence. We got through a lot of that, and we started assembling the evidence. We got through most of that, but we have a bit more to go. And then we're going to try to reconcile the evidence, see if we can come up with a general formulation that captures the aspects of the general will we've identified and doesn't contradict any of them. Finally, we're going to consult some secondary sources. So does everybody remember the two secondary sources we're going to look at? One that was assigned for today? Rawls. Good old Rawls. If you guys keep going with PP, you'll hear that name so many times that you'll be like dreaming about it. It's Rawls. Who was the second one? Berlin. Yeah, Isaiah Berlin. Great. Great, fascinating person. I don't know if you guys have read Two Concepts of Liberty, but it's a classic in political theory. It's very worth reading. He's also just like an incredible writer. He's very Rousseauian in the way he writes. It's like very emotional and moving. Basically the opposite of Rawls. Rawls writes like a lawyer. So here's a question that I didn't throw in last time, but that I won't. I should have. Why the will? Why is it the general will that we're so obsessed with here? I'm going to throw out some hints, but if you have any thoughts before I throw out hints, I'm interested to hear them. Okay, hint number one. What's the basic problem Rousseau is trying to solve here?
The fact that the social contract is corrupt and biased.
That's interesting. That's more of a discourse on the origins of inequality kind of problem. He doesn't mention that so much in the social contract. Zach?
So I guess he's trying to reconcile liberty and like political authority. So if it's like a will, it's like as if you're doing it kind of thing. Is that what you're
So
doing?
yeah, I think that's exactly on the right track. The second hint I was going to say is, what is the most important passage of the entire book? And that's basically what you're pointing at, which is this passage where he says, the task of this work is, quote, to find a form of association able to defend and protect with the whole common force the person and goods of every associate, and of such a nature that each, uniting himself with all, may still obey only himself and remain as free as before. That is the fundamental problem of which the social contract provides a solution. So if we can find a will that is perfectly general in the sense that each and every one of us has that will, it's part of our own will, then when that will is the source of the laws, when that will provides the constraints and limitations on how we can behave, we're only obeying our own will when we follow it. That's why the obsession with the general will is here. Rousseau's obsession with liberty and his focus on liberty explains why this is the basic concept of his political theory. Okay, so what we know about general will is that it comes into being through a social contract, which establishes a unified moral body, a body politic or republic. The general will involves a reciprocal alienation of rights, including the right to judge, and a duty to abide by the general will, to which we are all subject equally. and get some more stuff. So we read through this quote last time. We won't read, like, interpret it all, but I'll read through it quickly just to jog our memories. He says, this formula shows us that the act of association comprises a mutual undertaking between the public and the individuals, and that each individual, in making a contract, as we may say, with himself, is bound in a double capacity. First, as a member of the sovereign, he is bound to the individuals. And second, as a member of the state, he is bound to the sovereign. But the maxim of civil right, that no one is bound by undertakings made to himself, does not apply in this case, for there's a great difference between incurring an obligation to yourself and incurring one to a whole of which you form a part. So, on the one hand, the sovereign is bound to the people, because the individuals make up the sovereign. So what they will is going to determine what the sovereign can will. The sovereign is merely this collective person, right? Considered an active role. Secondly, individuals are subject to what the sovereign decrees. And that's when we consider the individuals as a state, because that's when they're passive, that's when they receive the rules. So there's this circular flow of obligation. And in that sense, you can see how Rousseau's trying to get this reflexivity, you call it, off the ground, where we are the thing that binds ourselves. It's something we do to ourselves. In one capacity, we are sovereign, in the other capacity, we are state. It's a twofold relationship. And he says, since the sovereign is formed entirely from the private individuals who make it up, it neither has nor could have an interest contrary to theirs. The sovereign, by the mere fact that it exists, is always what it should be. But each individual, as a man, or can, as a man, have a private will contrary to or different from the general will that he has as a citizen. His private interest can speak to him in an entirely different manner than the common interest. Yeah, let's dig into this a little bit. So the first one is pretty straightforward. Basically saying, since individuals make up the sovereign's will, what it decrees, can only come from what individuals want, what individuals decree. So it has to reflect the will of individuals. What about number two? The sovereign, by the mere fact that it exists, is always what it should be. That's a very obscure, metaphysical, Rousseauian kind of claim. Any thoughts on what he's getting at there? Yeah, Luke.
I mean, the way I kind of hear it is, like, in a democracy, if you don't like the president, it's like, well, you voted for him. Or not like you necessarily, but as a society, like, the society elected him, so even if you don't, like, agree with the decisions they're making, you agree to the democracy, and you agree as a democracy to that person, kind of thing.
I think that's definitely one of the conclusions he draws from this. Yeah, and I think you're reading some of book 4 into this claim, which is legitimate because he says it later. I think it applies even more generally than that, though. Hajar, did you have thoughts?
I was just gonna add, like, the part where it says is always what it should be. I think it's like he has to represent, like, the people's public interest, their vision of things.
That's getting
It was
on,
put in
yeah.
place, so
Yeah,
it has
yeah.
to reflect on them.
Right. So part of what it just means to be a general will is that it's reflecting the common interests of all people. So if it weren't reflecting the common interests of all people, it simply wouldn't be the general will. So it's almost an analytic claim in the sense that the predicate implies, or the subject implies the predicate. I don't know how many philosophy classes you guys have taken. Hopefully not that many. But if you've taken philosophy classes, you know what that means. If you haven't, what that means is just that it's definitionally true. It's that, like, to say that something is general will is to say that it's being determined only by common interests. And to say that it's being determined by common interests is to say it is what it should be. And if it weren't determined by common interests, it simply wouldn't be, by definition, the general will. So this statement would be true in either case. Jeremiah.
It seems like he's almost making a kind of moral argument, almost to a point, kind of like a metaphysical argument almost, that the sovereign should be a representation of people's interests, and that people should be ruled by their interests.
So it's a normative claim. There's definitely normative elements to it. The trick there is that he says by the mere fact that it exists. So he's not saying the general will can ever err. It's not saying that the general will ought to do the right thing. He's saying if it's doing the wrong thing, it's not even the general will. And what Luke was bringing up about democracy is interesting later, and we're going to look at these passages hopefully today, if not next time, where he says, imagine you go and you vote, and the person you wanted to win didn't win, but you all were voting for the general will, in the sense that you weren't voting on private interest. You were doing what he says you're supposed to do in a well-ordered society where people vote on the common good rather than the private good. And it turns out the person you voted for doesn't win. Rousseau says, well, you just discovered that what you thought was the general will really wasn't. In fact, what you wanted was the other guy. So you actually discovered your own will through this democratic process. Okay, and number 3, he says, but each individual can, as a man, have a private will contrary to or different from the general will that he has as a citizen. His private interest can speak to him in an entirely different manner than the common interest. This will be very important for us. Megan.
So I kind of read it as like, there's no I in team, but there's an I in interest. And like,
Love it.
if you're living in a society, let's say, where like food is very, very scarce, and you're starving, you're going to want to allocate those resources to yourself and not necessarily like everybody, because then you run out of food.
Right.
Yeah.
Importantly, though, part of you will want to allocate all those resources to yourself, your private interest. But we also are capable, as moral beings, of realizing what's in the common good. And when we go to the voting booth, we're supposed to vote for that. So if you're a farmer, you can go to the voting booth and you can say, oh, I think we need more, crop subsidies. Or you can go to the voting booth and you can say, subsidies are inefficient. I think what would be best for society is, division of labor and international exchange. To hell with my farm. I don't know what Rousseau's economic beliefs were. Probably not those ones. But if he had those economic beliefs, he would say the general will is the latter, not the former. Not voting for special privileges for yourself, but voting for what you think will help people overall in your society. So we have gone through 1 through 3, and we can add 3. We did 1 through 2. Okay. So number 3, we add to our list of what we know about the general will. The sovereign always expresses the general will, but individuals do not always express the general will, though sometimes they do. So because individuals have private, that is non-general wills, he says that in order that the social compact may not be an empty formula, it tacitly includes the undertaking, which alone can give force to the rest, that whoever refuses to obey the general will shall be compelled to do so by the whole body. This means nothing less than that he will be forced to be free. For this is the condition which, by giving each citizen to his country, secures him against all personal dependence. In this lies the key to the working of the political machine. This alone legitimizes civil undertakings, which, without it, would be absurd, tyrannical, and liable to the most frightful abuses. Wow, what a paradox. If we can't force people to be free, it will be tyranny. What in the world does this mean? Can I have some thoughts? Jeremiah.
Not everybody wants to be free.
Not everybody wants to be
Not
free.
everybody benefits from it.
In what sense would somebody not want to be free?
Well, here's one sense. A lot of people have trouble making decisions and planning out their lives. They get confused when they're young and they get in a position where somebody can stick them in a nice, well-outlined pattern for the rest of their life, and they follow through that. It is a much more easy way to live. They go with that and deal with their small everyday entertainments rather than deal with the big decisions that come with the
We
ingredient.
might choose passive tranquility over difficult, arduous liberty, perhaps. Any other thoughts? Yes.
So, I just think that, like, though that may be true, I don't think Rousseau would agree with that, because doesn't he think, like, it'd be irrational for anyone not to be, like, to choose liberty? Like, he thinks, like no one would give it up.
I think Rousseau believes that we have a fundamental interest in our own freedom, and that this is basically what we all want, even if we don't know it. And so I think